Hello and welcome to this video for today, whether you're here for the first time or you're returning. Hope you will enjoy. Alright, in this video today, we're having a bit of a discussion. A while back, and it was quite a while back actually, several months I think, I put out a video that was titled Getting More Nitpicking with Cards, and I actually kind of want to make that video into a series, and that's what spawned this video here today. So in this video today, I'm discussing getting more nitpicking with ramp cards. So I'm mostly talking about green ramp cards here. I'm not going to be talking about mana rocks here. I'm actually going to do another video about mana rocks, but I'm more talking about ramp spells and ramp creatures, I guess, for the most part. So yeah, that's what we're talking about here. You know, I was going to come out a little while back with a video about how underrated I thought Cultivate and Kodama's Reach were, because I've seen a few people sort of say how poor they sort of are to a degree, and I think they are still very good. I think they're very good for more new players, or it does depend what your deck's doing. Like if you're a spell slinger deck, then I can see maybe that you'll play one or the other or whatever, or maybe both if you just don't have access to some of the older cards and whatnot, as some people do, like Nature's Law and cards like that. People do forget that those cards are, you know, more difficult to get and whatnot, and some of the other options that are cheaper and whatnot are, you know, a little bit hit and miss and whatnot, and can be have a downside as well, you know, and whatnot. But again, for the most part, I've just started to find in playing the game that when you want to play a Cultivate or Kodama's Reach, you just don't. You're just like, well, I have a lot of better options. And when you're in green, you know, it is just like that. Like, again, I don't really tend to play many of the one mana dorks. There is a deck that I actually have a few one mana dorks in, but that's a very specific deck, and I don't run too much 1 CMC or less than 1 CMC sort of mana acceleration sort of style stuff, because again, I don't really care about like the CDH, you know, sort of, I guess, mana base, or, you know, whatever, the CDH fast mana ramp sort of style of stuff. As long as, like, again, I run most of the stuff that gets me lands for the most part, because lands are the best thing to ramp with for the most part. You're just like not going to have too many games where somebody's going to play a board wipe that actually kills all lands, or an effect that kills, you know, a land or many lands for the most part. And if they are, basically at that point, it's like, well, you just said, let's start the game again. You know, like you said, you know, this is the end of the game, let's start again. So I just find that's the best thing to do. And, you know, when you've got access to Harrow and Rolling Regrowth, that just put 2 lands into the battlefield, yeah, Rolling Regrowth, they are tapped or whatever, but still it's instant speed. You do have to sack a land, like I say, but still those 2 lands, or that 1 land to get 2 lands and untap at instant speed, you know, that's very flexible, because you can just pass the turn, and if you're worried about what your opponents are going to do, you can just sit there with whatever stuff you have, or even just untapped mana, because somebody might be just like, they've got some untapped mana there, I don't know what they're going to do, I'm not going to, you know, mess around too much, just in case they have something. So it's one of those plays where you can, if you have something, it's great, because then if you really need to get rid of something somebody plays, or, you know, somebody actually has something, and then they're pointing it at you, the laser beam or whatever, sort of thing. You can sort of answer it if you need to, but if you don't need to, then you can just go, oh right, cool, I'm just gonna put 2 lands into play at the end of the player before me's turn, and then I'm gonna untap and start doing more stuff for me. Like, that's a really good play if you're in a deck that has creatures and you have creature synergies like Beast Whisperer. Cards like that basically say when you cast a creature, you draw a card, or when you play a creature, you draw a card. Those sorts of effects, I just find that, Eternal Witness is really good. Yavimaya Dryad actually is a card that I think is underrated. Sometimes the whole, oh, I can put a land into play under an opponent's control or I can give an opponent a forest if they happen to be in green and have the forest walk on for it. That's kind of cute, but you often just do this for yourself to get more lands. Farhaven Elf, just like those sorts of effects. Springbloom Druid's really good as well. It's a Harrow on a body, so that's pretty good as well. So just all the creatures that basically are 3 CMC, and of course Sakura Tribe Elder is just amazing. Because again, they might draw you cards when you play them from other effects and whatnot, or again, you can just use them as chump blockers, or you can just use them as sacrifice fodder, and if you've got any amount of recursion, you can just get them back. Like, I have Sun Titan in one of my decks, or in most of my white decks, because it's really good. Most of the ramp creatures that I have are 3 or less, so if I ever put it into the battlefield or attack with it, oh look, I just happen to get back one of my, ramp creatures. That's just, gravy on top of whatever else I'm doing. Like, I get to, play Sun Titan, and I get a 3-mana spell for free, and I get something else off of that spell. Now, yes, most of them are just ramp spells, but again, that's meaning that the spell that I've cast is a lot less, and it's getting me further ahead, further through my deck, thinning my deck of lands, so I don't have to draw lands further through the game. You don't really need that many lands once you get to 6, 7, or 8. And once you're at that point, you're just like, well, now I can sort of start to close out the game or start to do other things because I've started to get this, really good value. And again, if you've got ways to sacrifice these creatures, especially if you've got Sun Titan, you're just like, okay, this turn I'm going to attack with Sun Titan, and in my graveyard is or even if you don't have ways, even if you've got a couple of the other creatures that are in your graveyard, you can get them back. And again, if you have like things like Anointed Procession, even some of these other effects, or token doublers or whatnot, things that can copy creatures, Panharmonica and things like this, other effects that just sort of get you value from having creatures or whatnot, those sorts of things can really be good. So there's just so many times that these creatures are just amazingly powerful, and I just really have cut back to going, you know what, I need to have these cards in my deck, because even if I, most of the time I'll draw them early enough in the decks that they're in to ramp into everything else that I have in my deck, and especially my commander, because a lot of the time I try to look at where my commander is on the curve, and if my commander's at 3 or 4, then I'm kind of a little bit like, well, I actually don't really want these creatures. I still want Sakura Tribe Elder, probably, if my commander's 4 or 3, but the ones that are at 3, I definitely don't want them at 3 in my deck that has a commander that is CMC 3 or CMC 4, really, because I want to cast my commander a couple of turns early. So you want your some other sort of mana producing creatures, but these are usually the better ones. There are a few like 2 mana ones that are okay, and it depends on what synergies you have. I've found that in my +1/+1 counters deck, I have the one from Ravnica Allegiance, I think it is, that when it gets +1/+1 counters, it taps for 3 mana. So that one's pretty good as well. It just in that deck, because you can force counters onto creatures, so you can force it to have the ability to tap for extra mana pretty easily in that deck. And it's just another 2 mana ramp spell. And if it dies eventually, you don't really care that much. It just doesn't happen a lot. Really. And I do find that board wipes happen less and less than what, people actually think they do. Like, there are times that, you just go, it's board wipe tribal all of a sudden. But, for the most part, I just find that board wipes actually don't happen that much, because either the person who has the board wipe is the person that has the actual scary board, or just no one draws it because, we play maybe 1 to 2, maybe 3 at most board wipes, in our decks. But does depend, like there are people I know who play like 6 or 7, and it's like, well, even then they never drew their board wipes. And then it's like, oh, I died. Okay, what was my top deck? Oh, it was the board wipe I needed 3 or 4 turns ago. Things like that. So, but to get back to ramp, like I have been getting a lot of like focus on my graveyard style deck, which I didn't really want to take out the Sakura Tribel. Oh, not the Sakura Tribel, but I didn't really want to take out the Wood Elves and the other 3 mana basically gets lands into play creatures. I didn't really want to do that, but my commander was at 4, and I always just kept finding that even if I had the creatures that I could play and get them into play, because this is a graveyard deck again, so I either want to sack them or get them into my graveyard with my commander's ability to put them there and whatnot. So I don't want to have this, because it's just like, well, it's too slow. I need either 2 CMC or 1 CMC sort of ramp in that deck, because again, you're just like, well, I need that. I need to get my commander out as quickly as possible so that I can actually start doing stuff with my commander, because it's a very small commander and it needs to attack, and it needs other effects that are very deep in the deck that it needs to dig for with its ability to actually get to being big enough to actually, punch in and, survive combat. It's not like a Voltron deck. It's just like, I'm trying to get this trigger off every single time, and all I care about is if it survives. I was thinking about the dog that actually gives indestructible, but at any rate, in that deck, I've changed my ramp to having a bunch of these 1 mana mana dorks. And they're not the best things in the world. I've still got a few 2 mana ones, but again, I've just shifted that deck's focus because it needs to get out fairly early, and just those 1 mana mana dorks and whatnot are very efficient and very good for what that deck's doing, because again, it cares about creatures in all zones. Most of my decks care about creatures for the most part, so that's why I tend to look at the decks in that way, I guess, and I just think that when you're thinking about ramp in Commander, I think there's these two sort of sides to the coin, where I was just talking there a little while ago about saying, most of the time I don't care about the fast mana and whatnot, but in that deck, you've got to get your commander out. And in my deck that has a 3 CMC commander, again, I'm very focused on having 1 and 2 CMC ramp, because you want to get your commander out as quickly as possible. It is harder, but it is still feasible, but it is still harder again. But still, you can't do too much because again, at a certain point, it becomes like, well, that's all I can do. And like again, I'm not a huge fan of soldering. That's just me personally, and that's another nitpick that I might get into a little bit later and might discuss a little bit more. But that's just my way of playing, and that's just my affinity towards soldering. I just don't like it very much because I think it just should be banned in the end and whatnot. But again, I think it is super good, and if you can run it, maybe you should. But I just find that I'm in green, so I'm just like, well, why do I need this artifact that can get blown up by a whole bunch of stuff and whatnot? And again, yes, mana dorks can get blown up and whatnot, but in the decks that I have the mana dorks, it's a graveyard deck. So again, I can recur them very, very easily in that deck. So again, I'm just not worried about them. If they die, they die. I'll just bring them back next turn. Or, again, I have other effects that I can get lands back to my graveyard and things like that. So I just never really worry because, again, the graveyard is, essentially part of my hand for the most part in that deck. And again, if the graveyard gets exiled, then that's a big problem for me when it's pretty full. But if it's empty, then it's like, or not has too much in it, then I can recover. But again, it does depend on the synergy. It does depend on the commander. It depends on the rest of the deck, what sort of mana dorks for the most part, or, mana fetching sort of creatures that you want and whatnot. You do have to consider your curve and whatnot when you're thinking about this sort of stuff. So that's the way I look at it. I don't look at it like this is a competitive edge that much. I don't really think, I'm not looking at this like, well, it is a competitive edge to a degree because the lower your CMC, the better in a way. But again, I just find that the decks that I build, I don't really care for the most part how fast my mana is in a lot of these decks, as long as it's fairly consistent. That's why I have so many things in that 3 CMC slot and that 2 CMC slot for the most part. I still have a couple of 1s as well, but still in those decks I am running certain things that will, 9 times out of 10 I'm guaranteed to do something by at least turn 3, and that's fast enough for those decks to be going, okay, on turn 4, now I can probably get my commander out with a land drop, because that's where my commanders, sometimes are at. They're at 4 or 5 mana, depending again, but, again, you're just like, in certain decks, you have to run certain things because you just don't have as many other options, I guess. In my squirrel deck, I have Harrow and Rolling Regrowth. And that's not because it's got many effects that care about landfalls. It's just because those are my best options, really. It's not a spell deck. It's not really caring about anything like that. But I just can't run anything else because I don't want to run Cultivate or Kadama's Reach, because I want the lands into play as quickly as possible again, and I want to leave up the activation of something else if I really need it. So again, it's just having to have those cards in there. It's not that bad. Again, the commander in that deck is 4, but still, just like for the most part, most of the other ramp is between 1 and 2. So again, like, you still find ways to get around some of these restrictions when you say, my deck is a tribal deck. My deck is doing this. Even saying that, I'm very strict in that deck, and saying, well, I'm not going to run a Sakura Tribe Elder in this deck because it's not on that tribe. And I know some people are very much like that with a lot of their tribal decks. They're like, well, this is a tribal deck. If it's not of the tribe, then I don't really care about it. But In my opinion, for the most part, when you're playing a deck, you just need to run cards that actually give you the resources in which you need to play the game. You can't just rely on, saying, oh, well, this is this tribal deck, and then it's like, well, what tribe is it? Okay, it's Dragon Tribe or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But you're running that Omen Speaker or guy or whatever he is that reduces your dragon spells by 1. Oh yeah, but that's themed onto dragons. Yeah, that sure, I get that. But you could get, spells in there that basically net you mana as well. So, it doesn't really like make much difference. And then you start saying, well, if you're playing spells that just net you mana or reduce the spell's cost of any spells that are in your deck, it might help your opponents as well. I think most of them do. But again, you can run those, or you can just run a ramp spell. It doesn't really hurt you. And again, I just think that most of the ones that are generally run out there are pretty good for the most part, and you use them for other things as well. And again, if you draw them late, even though it's like a dead draw, for the most part, you're getting more lands out of your deck. And again, you might have those effects that are out that say, hey, when you play a creature, you draw a card. So it's kind of like 3 mana, depending kind of on what creature it is. But again, it's 3 mana to sort of cycle and draw another card. So you get another spin at whatever you're drawing. And when you play that creature again, you are going to ramp. So it is maybe 2 mana or maybe 1 mana for that creature. And, then you're also getting a land out of your deck. So you're less likely to draw lands. So it just helps you out in so many ways. I'm just like all over like playing the creatures that sort of net me all sorts of things. Doesn't matter what. I even have like some of the effects like the card that's from Jumpstart that makes unicorns whenever you cast a creature or whenever you play a creature or whatever it is. You just like get so much advantage off of things like that because you make free creatures from it, and you just play the Zendikar landfall one that either it gives you a 2/2 creature or it gives you a +1/+1 counter to all your creatures and vigilance until end of turn. Those things are really good, especially like late game. You're trying to close things out. Your creatures aren't quite big enough. It gives you that extra like couple of power that you might need. And again, even if it doesn't quite give you enough power to kill everyone, you might be able to take out maybe one player. I don't know, it depends. But again, at least you can do some damage, and then you can stay back on defense because you've given yourself vigilance for the turn. So all these sorts of things, and again, just like it's just so many things that it will synergize with better. It will synergize with the graveyard. Again, there's just so many synergies, and instant and sorceries only fit into very specific decks that are dedicated to their plan and are like this is a big no-no specifically for this deck, or this deck is a spell deck. And even then, I still think that you're better off for the most part running spells that benefit you the most. There's the 4 mana spells that are out there, all the sort of explosive vegetation sort of spells that I see a few people play, and this is not 100% true for every single deck, but I just don't think that most of them are very good. I just don't think that they do enough. So I don't particularly run them. I don't particularly think that they're very good. There's a few that have come out in the last few years that have sort of been basically the same thing but reprinted in different ways. Skyshroud Claim is one of the better ones, but I still think it's not that great. I think it's okay, but it is like one of those cards where it does give you 2 lands, for the price of 1 spell, but it is kind of 4 mana, and that's the problem that I have with it. It is a lot cheaper because it gets you those lands into play untapped, but again, it's just getting to that 4 sometimes, and at 4 I find that you're in an awkward spot a lot of the time, because a lot of commanders are at 4. A lot of commanders are at 5. And getting those lands at that point in the game is kind of redundant. It does depend on the deck. Like, our Omnath is completely different. Like, almost all the landfall Omnath decks or whatnot are completely different to this, but I'm not really talking about those. I'm just talking in general about almost all the other decks that exist in a green pair or a touching green color, I guess. I don't know. I've walked myself around in a circle there, but again, anyway, I just don't think it's that relevant. Especially if your commander's like 3 mana, again, it's super irrelevant for the most part, in my opinion. Yeah, sure, you're getting more mana, and it is another ramp spell to a degree, and if you don't have anything more, then it's kind of like, well, there you go, you've got more mana for more spells. And I get it if you're in a real, like, this is a landfall deck, and I'm centered around Omnath, who's already like 7 mana or whatever else, and if he dies, I'm probably never getting him back. But that's true for most commanders at any rate. So, it's one of those things where, it's very hard to justify most of these other spells. Skyshroud Claim's the one I would play the most, if any of these, but I don't see anyone really play it, and I don't play it, again, as I sort of said. I just think that it's superseded by a lot of spells that are at 1, 2, and 3, and it's just kind of like the 8th or 9th card, or whatever, the 10th or 11th or 12th card that I'd probably think about putting in. I would put it in Great Henge way above this. Even though it's like 9 mana or whatever, it's not really 9 mana. It never is. It's basically almost always 3 or 2 mana or whatever. And basically it's net 0 mana for the most part, because you just immediately tap it for 2 mana and then get some extra value out of it by casting some other stuff. So it's just one of those absurd cards that gives you, mana, life, counters, cards, just like an absurd amount of things basically for free. It pays for itself almost immediately, very easily. Oh, 1 mana to gain 2 life, draw a card, and put a +1/+1 counter on my creature. Okay, that seems pretty damn good. Even that's, absurdly good. And over the game, if it sticks out for any amount of time, it's just absurdly good. So, just the power behind that card, I would recommend that way over, Skyshroud Claim and a lot of the other sort of 4 mana spells. Yes, sure, it's like a lot of money, and I'm not taking into consideration budget here. A lot of the other cards are budget, but, even so, saying again, you can just find a lot of options that are at 1, 2, and 3 mana. I'm always happy to play Wayfarer's Bauble. I'm always happy to play Font of Fertility in my decks. I don't see many people play Font of Fertility. I know some people say, oh, well, it's enchantment. I don't care about the enchantment. If I was in an enchantment deck, I would care about it. But there's so many people that go, oh, well, Wayfarer's Bauble is fine, or Sol Ring's fine, but you don't care about artifacts, and it's an artifact. Oh, it's just a good card. Yeah, so is Font of Fertility. It's just a good card, or it's just decently good, and I think, there's some cards that are in my deck, like Search for Tomorrow, that, it says it's 3 CMC on the top, but basically, for the most part, it's 1. You know, if it's ever, you know, a 3 Sims 3 spell, yeah, that's fine. I don't really care. Again, that's fine. If I have it on that turn 1, 2, or whatever, or on the early turns of the game, it's just fine. Again, there's never a point that it's bad. Yeah, sure, 3 mana to get 1 mana isn't the best, but still, when you can cast it on the early turns just for 1 mana and you get that, you know, extra land drop and that extra draw straight away and just can untap and play an extra land, and you're at 4 mana on turn 3, it's just absurdly good. So those were some of the cards that I just sort of wanted to talk about and wanted to discuss, that I think, you know, somewhat see overlooked from like the Cultivates and the Kadama's Reach. I think still Cultivate and Kadama's Reach are maybe the 9th or 10th or maybe 11th or 12th card that you would put into your deck. It does depend on what budget you're in, again, but I would consider them underneath, like, again, Harrow and Rolling Regrowth, and I would consider them under all the creatures, basically, that do the same thing for 3 mana or 2. You know, they basically enter and get a land, or enter and get 2 lands. They enter, when you sack them, you get a land. And again, Wayfarer's Bauble, Font of Fertility, and a couple other cards like that, Search for Tomorrow, are really good. The cards that I think more people should play and should see more play out there. Again, deck diversity is kind of good, but again, it does depend on what you're in. Like if you're in the Spellslinger deck, again, as I sort of said, it might be a bit different for you because, again, you can't run many of the creatures, so your options are a bit different. And again, it would be nice if they actually reprinted, you know, some cards like Nature's Law and whatnot, because that would get more copies out there. They just reprinted 3 Visits, so it's not like we can't see them reprinting it. It would be nice as well if they reprinted Wayfarer's Bauble as well, since it's fairly expensive to a degree, but it's not super expensive. But it just keeps going up, much like the reason Sol Ring and whatnot is stable, or has been sort of going down a little bit actually, is that they keep printing it. And it'd be great if they would reprint Wayfarer's Bauble, so that its price would start to restabilize and go down and whatnot, and more people could get more copies into their decks and whatnot. But again, that's another topic for another day. But anyway, guys, this has been my discussion on getting more nitpicking with ramp spells. What did you think? Tell me what you think. Right down there in the comments below. I'll be sure to be coming out with more stuff like this in the future for you all, if you have liked it. Please remember that the success of channels like this is based on viewers like you, so please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing if you would like to support this content. You can also get social with us on our Discord and on our Facebook. If you would like to further support the channel, you can go onto our Patreon. All links are in the description. Thank you for your support. It really means a lot. I hope you have enjoyed this video here today, and if you have, I hope you will come back for another one. See you then.